See you later. Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the council meeting for, I don't even know what day it is today. 26th of January, 2023. At this time, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do I hear adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Thank you. Welcome, Philippa. Can you hear us okay? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. This time we have a couple proclamations. Bear with me. I've been losing my voice, and which makes my wife and family happy, but we'll go with this. First one is going to be on Black History Month. Whereas each year Black History Month is observed in February, and whereas the origins of Black History Month date back to 1915, when Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded the organization known today as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And where observing Black History Month provides opportunities to gain a deeper understanding of African American history and acknowledge the centuries of struggles for equality and freedom. And whereas Black History Month also celebrates the achievements and contributions that African Americans have made in shaping our country, society, and communities. And whereas every year, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History sets a theme for Black History Month, and the theme for 2023 is Black Resistance. Whereas this year, Black History Month theme is also a call to everyone to study the history of Black Americans, responses to establish safe places where Black lives can be sustained, fortified, and respected. Whereas to participate in observing Black History Month, those interested can visit www.asalh.org to learn more about the origins of the month, this year's theme, and America and African American history. Now, therefore, the Mayor of the City of Lake Forest do hereby proclaim February 23rd is Black History Month in the City of Lake Forest Park, and I urge all citizens to join me in this special observance. Signed this 26th day of January 2023, Jeff R. Johnson. So thank you. All righty. Just so you guys know, this is the biggest crowd we've had since 1921. And I'm kind of not joking. That's pretty amazing. So,
Or the tree ordinance.
well, we haven't had a tree ordinance.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. Well, we all know why you're here. The next proclamation, and I don't know, I think, Annette, where are you? Come on, stand up. And obviously my staff doesn't recognize or respect my wishes. This is actually a 1.5-page proclamation. And for you guys who know me, we don't usually do this type of stuff. So here we go. Honoring and thanking Annette Heller, City of Lake Forest Park Utility Billing and Payroll Analyst. Whereas on January 31st, 2023, after spending more than 20 years serving the citizens of Lake Forest Park as the utility billing and payroll analyst, Annette Heller will retire. And whereas Ms. Heller began her work in the Public Works Department for the City of Lake Forest Park on November 12th, 2002, and later transitioned into the Finance Department. And whereas Ms. Heller created an access database to track ongoing and completed work orders for the Public Works Department. And whereas Ms. Heller has proven herself to be a valuable asset to the City of Lake Forest Park with her vast knowledge of both payroll and utility billing systems. And whereas Ms. Heller has overseen an implementation of multiple payroll systems, including payroll conversions for the city, and where Ms. Heller was key player in the participation in the financial software system upgrade to cloud version, where the original deadline was met after adapting to an ongoing challenges early in the pandemic to go live with the Springbook cloud system in June of 2020. I'm just looking back at whoever wrote this. Whereas Ms. Heller created the salary benefit spreadsheet that is currently used as the budgeting tool for the city's adopted biennial budget, and whereas Ms. Heller has worked constantly for the betterment of the City of Lake Forest Park citizens by answering the citizens' question regarding sewer utility payments, and whereas during her tenure with the city, Ms. Heller has been known for knowledgeable, competent, professional, reliable, and dependable. Whereas throughout her career, Ms. Heller constantly demonstrates that her priority was always the success of our organization. Now therefore, the mayor and the city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby sincerely thank you and congratulate Annette Heller, City of Lake Forest Park, utility billing and payroll analyst, on her retirement from public service, and wish her all the best for a very happy, relaxing, well-deserved retirement with her cat Clover. We invited Clover tonight, but she was busy. Signed the 26th day of January, 2023, Jeff Johnson, Mayor, Lake Forest Park. Thank you, Annette. You know, obviously we have a few things, so no, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
And-
I'm gonna go first.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go first and present you a couple items. So the city, well, first I want to say a couple words. Okay, so first, Matt and I both wrote that proclamation for you.
Okay.
That was very detailed.
appreciate
Sorry about that. But we both wrote that, but we wanted to take a minute. I want to take a minute on behalf of the city and just say thank you, because how do you sum up 20 years in a page? You don't. So there's 100 things that we probably didn't include in that proclamation that we're grateful for. The citizens probably aren't even aware that you've done behind the scenes. The innovation, the strong, when change has come our way, when you jump onto something, you jump on and jump in, and it's appreciated and recognized. And so we just want to definitely recognize all of that. And so we have a plaque to recognize your 20 years of service.
Wow.
And some flowers, and we did not forget Clover.
That's important, because during COVID, she sat in a chair next to me and worked for the city just like I did. So, and she actually knows the words, let's go work for the city, and runs her chair.
And so basically on behalf of the city, I just want to, and finance department, thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Lindsay. I have such mixed feelings about retiring, because Lake Forest Park is really my home. I spend more time during the week here than I do up in Arlington where I live. And I'm gonna miss being here with all of my friends, but I'll be back, spend some money in the mall and give you some tax revenue and things like that. So, but I'm looking forward to my new career as a retiree. I'm thinking I need to go back and learn things like Spanish and take some history courses. I just love going to school and learning stuff. So that's kind of on the agenda right now. So, but thank you so much for all your kind words.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, that was a little too easy, Annette. Just hold on. So last week, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to Annette, and she's telling me about how she was chopping wood. Would you like to tell the story, or would you like me to embellish it? Well, she hurt herself.
Oh,
That's the nice way of putting it. Yeah, I would have never thought. I've been trying to talk to you about a log splitter before, but that was great. And most people don't know you drive all the way from Smoky Point down here every night. That's because she's still in bed from being in the casino, so that's okay. But no, she's been a fantastic help. She's always great to see. Always had a good laugh. And I would really like if the council could get and I'd like to get a picture with you before you sit down. Okay? Because I'd like that. Come on, get up here.
I'm so sorry I'm not there for this.
You know, looking out over the room, I won't introduce you, but we have many years of staff here. And thank you guys for coming back to see this. I know you all worked with Annette. I see Aurora and I see, well, I don't even talk about you anymore. That one there. She is supposed to have a new car by now, but she hasn't. So most of you know who I'm talking about. So otherwise, it's really nice to see you guys. And thank you for coming and doing this. And that's been a great part of the city. And we're going to miss her. And like I said, we were talking about wood splitting, which is pretty cool. So we wish her luck and we'll see her when we see her. Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to citizens' comments. Thank you, Chief. Okay, first up is Polly Good.
Ooh, hello, Paula Good here. I wanted to comment on the Sound Transit meeting that I attended today with a few other Lake Forest Park residents. And the 90-day pause that the city asked for was denied. And a lot of the citizens that were there came together with an idea of an ask for Sound Transit as to what is it that we want. And we have, at least the people that my group, Vicky and the Beach Club, is that we're asking Sound Transit for the bus queue jump lanes and different pullouts for the buses instead of taking, God, I don't know how close to be to this thing. Instead of the walls and the property acquisitions, I think research has shown that they will accomplish the same amount of gain on transit. So it's been hard to be part of it without having a specific ask. And I think that's what the city should be asking for, is more input for these jump queues, because it's already an approved method down 145th. So why can't it be used from 145th to 165th? So I wanted to bring that up. And then also about the wall, Sound Transit thinks that if we do put walls up, that City of Lake Forest Park will be responsible for graffiti remediation. So I just thought I'd just throw that out there, is that you will have graffiti. I see it every day across the street from me on the King County housing. And so I'm sure that'll be a point of contention between the city and Lake Forest, the city, Sound Transit, and WashDOT. So there's the Faith Hill? Faith is the property person, and she said it would be the responsibility of Lake Forest Park. So you've all seen how graffiti is rampant everywhere. So might want to think about that, because the jump queue lanes would avoid that. We wouldn't have walls. So that's what I wanted to report to you. And hopefully we can have more participation with Sound Transit in regards to better design for the city. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vicky Scurry.
I'm Vicky Scurry, Lake Forest Park. And, you know, every time I go to one of these meetings, I end up with more questions than when I start. So what I learned today at the board meeting is that they claim they've been talking to you weekly since 2019, maybe even 2018, and that you've all bought into this plan with the BRT lane. This is what they tell us. And they've also had 2,000 or more what they call interactions with our community. I can tell you that between 2018 and 2020, except for coming here for a couple of meetings, I had no interactions while design development was happening, and they were shifting the road from the east to the west. And apparently they did that because 9 homes were going to be totally taken as acquisitions. But instead of asking, how can we save those homes and restore this community to its well-being, they decided just to shove the road to the west. And they said the city agreed. That's what they implied. They met with you, everything is okay. And now the only problem is we don't like what it looks like. They seem to be totally ignoring the disconnect from nature and the pollution, the sound. They continue to say it's only going to have 1 decibel of sound, which is a negligible, that's a nothing. It's impossible. They're adding another road, a lane. And everybody knows the more width you put, the more traffic you have. And it's the rubber on the road rather than the electric buses, their motors, that's responsible for the noise. So that is impossible. We keep having these conversations that I'd say are 10 feet off the ground with Sound Transit. And they keep pointing back to the city and saying, well, you guys all agreed to this. You citizens never had any complaints. We showed you 30% design by Zoom and no one said anything. So we assumed you all love it. And they said the only time we started getting these letters is when we went for the acquisitions. And that's because that's the first time people really had an idea what was going on. And I think if I hadn't done the graphics, fewer people now would know what's going on. And I still wonder, because I only communicate with a few people. You know, I'm just an individual trying to inform my neighbors. I'm not communicating with 14,000 people who live in Lake Forest Park. And so I ask you, when is the community going to be engaged as a whole? And when are we going to all be represented as a whole instead of piecemeal and actually serving only one interest? And I'd like to know what's the history of this whole thing, how it happened. So. And I guess the other thing I'll say, I have 34 more seconds, is it's not what it looks like as much. It is a certain concern, but it's the impacts to the environment. And it's this disconnect, which is also going to create this, we're going to have more like a Lake City look. And we're also going to bring all the stuff that goes with the Lake City look to this community, because you're disconnecting us from our natural environment and putting us into a concrete corridor. So with that said, I hope that we can have further discussions, real discussions. And if Claudia Balducci really comes here to walk the neighborhood, let's walk it with her and talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jean Reed.
Hi, Jean Reed, 18551 28th Avenue. And just following up, we've spent basically all day at this hearing. I don't know if any of you were able to listen into any of it, but it was a little bit shocking. And the big take home was that everything they are doing because this city wanted it, because this administration wanted it, because the city councils all requested. So for example, having like the pullouts where the buses could pull out and then have a time delay so they could pull back in traffic, which I understand is meant to accomplish, 80–90% of what this whole dedicated lane. No, the cities insisted on a bat lane. That was the only option they wanted. And we didn't look at it because that's just not what the cities want. They told us that basically the city has been very involved and engaged. And besides, this is the final acquisition. There's just a few properties left and we're past 60%. We're practically at 90% now. So it's just really too late to do anything about it. So I guess they saved our properties till the very end. And now they say that there's nothing that can be done. Although it's at 60%, there's been 4 or 5 people did public records requests for that 60%. They've been told they can't see it yet. Or you can't say that it's there and people can see it if they in fact can't see it. They claim 2,100 interactions since the inception of the project. Is that since 2016? And it appears they're counting like every time somebody looks at their website. That's not a lot of interactions over a space of 6 years. They cited that this lane, our lane, the 2 minutes it saves is going to save 18,000 hours per year for transit riders based on nothing. They did not say what that was based on, but seems to be on some model for traffic in 2042. I guess assuming that all of the buses are filled to capacity. There's no way to take the footprint down on the bus stop where it's encroaching onto the wetland and buffer, because there has to be room for 2 bendy buses to get in to pull out. It has to be that big. And we know it's an aesthetic concern, but just not relevant to their design. I encourage this council to clarify several things. One is, at what point are they applying for their permits, and therefore what codes are applicable? Are they going to claim that since this all started way back in 2019, those are the codes that apply? Is this somehow grandfathered? What's that process? Because it's kind of important. We have good codes for the trees, could always be better in my opinion, but and also for the stormwater management. You know, if we have the capacity to do things like protect our salmon runs by requiring some filtration for the 6-PBD quinone, you know, can those be put in place, or is the cat out of the bag because it wasn't in the code in 2019 or whatever they say? But in any case, the electeds and leadership group and your vision for the corridor and all the cities affected are the ones that have dictated what they have to do to us. And they'll meet and work closely with us to try and address the aesthetics. And it's not aesthetics. We're talking about our salmon. We're talking about our trees. We're talking about 30 years to re-achieve canopy, and then they have no place to plant them. And then if they can plant them somewhere else, well, heavens knows, if they're planting somewhere else, they're sure not going to benefit us. Anyway, I thought it was important that the council know that their representation is that the reason they're doing all this is because of your advocacy, and I wasn't sure you knew that.
Thanks, Gene. Anybody else here that'd like to speak? Online?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have Julian Anderson.
Welcome, Julian.
Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks. I favor construction of the Stride 3 project to provide Lake Forest Park and neighboring cities with a speedy connection to light rail at the 148th Street Station in Shoreline. I oppose the current plans for construction of the eastbound dedicated lane in the 1.2-mile segment just north of 145th. The faults and the negative impacts of this sound transit plan are well known to you. I urge the mayor and the council to direct city staff to take several important initiatives so that the sound transit construction plans might be amended in this particular segment. One, hire a permitting specialist to manage the blizzard of tree removal and other permit applications soon to be submitted by Sound Transit. 2, forbid the bundling of permits and require permit applications to be signed by property owners. 3, require mayoral agreement to any administrative reductions in the requirements of Lake Forest Park Municipal Code. 4, refute claims by Sound Transit that required environmental protections are amenities. Insist that they are requirements. 5, insist on a full and timely information from Sound Transit. 6, create a new set of pages on the Lake Forest Park website for the full presentation of information and documents regarding the Sound Transit project in Lake Forest Park, as was done for the community discussion of alternatives for town center. 7, insist Sound Transit provide a complete survey of the trees to be removed, including size, species, and especially the value of these trees' environmental services, using iTrees or a similar protocol. 8, engage a SEPA specialist to review the self-issued Sound Transit SEPA and DNS and determine if there are grounds to insist on an amendment to the SEPA and DNS because of revisions to the alignment and takings since the SEPA and DNS were originally authored by Sound Transit. Waiting for Sound Transit to manage the timing and content of information flow does not serve the interests and concerns of LFP folks who have informed themselves about this project, nor in fact does it serve your interest as council members. Especially worrisome is the divergence between information known by city staff and the more current information delivered to some Lake Forest Park residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Anybody else?
Yes, Maddie Larson.
Welcome, Maddie.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being up and doing the good work of the city this evening. I just want to, if I could just amplify Julian, I would. I'm not going to waste anybody's time repeating what he said. I absolutely endorse every point he made. Thank you, Julian. But I do want to encourage you, council. I know you're motivated. I know you're working hard on behalf of the city, but to take back control of the narrative. I was really discouraged to see the way Kenmore was using their city power or persuasion to convince their neighbors, their yellow shirts, to come out today, because there were just a few people in Lake Forest Park who wanted to overrule the wish of the voters with BRT. And I think we need to take this narrative back that we're somehow an obstructionist, small town, little city who's not going to bite back. I think that we need to tell our story about how we have a long history of being environmental stewards, and we are not satisfied with having Sound Transit tell flat out lies about how they're engaging with us and the outreach that they've been doing to challenge their assumptions and to assert ourselves as environmentalists who are responding to climate change with essential requirements for tree canopy, for carbon sequestration, for water filtration, and so forth. I think there's a story to tell there, and I'd love to see you guys push back hard on the blatant lies that are being told about how our communities' needs and interests are being addressed. They just aren't. They're being ignored, and we're being shoved aside. And I would be glad to work side by side with you on any initiative to press on before we get to the 90% that they said today would be happening over the next few months. So thanks for your time. And again, thanks for all your work tonight.
Thanks, Maddie.
If you wish to address the council, please use the raise hand function. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We'll close citizens' comments at this time. And with that, we will move on to the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Consent calendar has been moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, any abstain? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just for the benefit of the folks that are on the public and on the internet as well as here, we will have a couple of comments about Sound Transit, the meeting today. The Mayor, Vice Chair Cassover, myself, Minister Hill in the background. We were unfortunately not able to make comment until 4 o'clock, I believe it was this afternoon, because of a bifurcation of the comments. But I wanted to make sure that folks understood that we will be making some thoughts known about that and our impressions during our council reports at the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, ordinance and resolutions for introduction referrals. Andy, you doing this, or Steve? Oh, Steve, I didn't see you way over there. Ordinance 23-1263, creating chapter 12.50 of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, retaining walls. Mr. Bennett, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Have I got this on? Is it?
Yeah, just you might raise it up a little bit too.
Okay.
The whole thing raises.
Oh, this whole thing, that's right. Down here?
Now there's a button.
We still need to get that thing motorized to drive around the room.
I gotta come more often. It's down. Thank you, Mayor, council members. Good evening. The draft ordinance you have before you is intended to create a set of standards to regulate the construction and the appearance of retaining walls that are built within the public right-of-way or adjacent to the public right-of-way. And so they're included, the draft regulations are intended to be in the right-of-way section of the city code, so that once we receive a right-of-way permit application, that would trigger compliance with these regulations. So the city clerk could put up my portion of the agenda package here and just kind of walk through real quickly what's in the ordinance and the attachment, which is a set of basic design guidelines that are referred to in the regulations. So the as it's shown here, the, I don't know if, there we go. So as you can see, the first section is establishing some regulations just related to the overall character, construction methods and standards, which would they would be required to meet. And then this third section, the second section establishes those standards and also establishes that the Public Works Director is making the decision. And then on the second page, it deals with certain types of retaining walls that would not be allowed. Retaining rockeries over 4 feet are not acceptable as a retaining wall, and then timber laggings are not considered a permanent structure. So this is an area where we may hear from the Public Works Department about, is there some level of height that would be, the council would be okay with there being an exception for that related to some projects that are the city's working on. So, you know, that will be a policy decision for the council. You know, does the city want to practice what it preaches or not? You know, and put in similar types of walls that are required to have a certain aesthetic. So we'll be more on that as we talk about this more. Next section just deals with the idea that concrete walls are prone to graffiti, so they should be coated with moisture barrier and anti-graffiti paint. And then the third section is sort of the meat of what's really, you know, not typical boilerplate. This is language that a lot of cities have in their road design standards. But so here we're trying to you know, provide more guidance than maybe you know, might have been found in some other cities, and say that not only do these there has to be a theme. We're going to provide some examples of a theme for how these retaining walls should be designed to appear, and then we're going to refer to this the design standards, just like we do in the town center. We have some regulations refer to a set of design standards that are a separate document. And so that I'd like to draw your attention to those standards. The rest of the ordinance is pretty perfunctory. And those, so the 2 pages, Matt, if you could go to the last 2 pages of that. There we go, thank you. It's just established an intent of what these guidelines are intended to do, which is to mitigate the impacts of the large monotonous retaining walls in the right-of-way, and by requiring architectural and landscaping treatments that reduce the harshness of such walls. And the first one is just that the walls have a relief to them that depicts a strong relationship with the Northwest and the surrounding environment, including native trees, flora and fauna. And then it provides 2 photographic examples that it could look like. Then on the second page, the second and last page, is sort of an alternative way to comply, which is you could deviate, the applicant could deviate from provision 1 if landscaping and vegetation are incorporated in a way which effectively breaks up the monotony of the wall finish, and refers to these 2 examples that you see on the second page of the guidelines. So it gives the applicant some flexibility, a way to approach it, and also you know, also ensures that the city is getting something that's going to be a long-term addition to the landscape of the city that is you know, going to be more suited to what we think of as the identity of the city. So this is really an opportunity to kind of hear what get your questions, so we can you know, consider those and see if there's any additional types of text to come out or that need to be addressed. So happy to address questions.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you very much. This is very helpful, and I think we've all learned quite a bit more about retaining walls in the last few weeks than we thought we would. And we've all been out looking at what the alternatives are around there. I have maybe 3 questions. First of all, if there was a deviation, is there a way that the city could specify figure 3? I mean, I'm sorry, figure 3 and not just have figure 4. Because to me, I actually think that the appeal of having actual plants as opposed to just ivy is important. So consider how we might get, if we're going with a greenery approach, how do we get the optimum situation consistent with what our city would like to see? My second question is, why not require greenery in all cases? So that's a consideration. I think as decorative as figure 1 and 2 are, they are kind of bleak because they're gray concrete at the end of the day. So should we think about integrating, and I asked my other council members too, should we think about integrating greenery no matter what the design? And then the third question is really the public safety one and the design of the protective fence for retaining walls above a certain height. You have to have some kind of security fencing. So I do think that we probably want to discuss that topic, what we would like to see. I recall the presentations that we got about the creation of potential dead zones that are security and safety risks by themselves, separate from the safety issue of falling off the wall. So if we could think about how to specify the fencing and that zone, that public safety zone in connection to the fencing as part of this, that would be, I think, a useful enhancement of what we have here. So those are my questions and concerns. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Steve, thanks very much for bringing this to us. My daughter laughs because when we're driving along, I'm sometimes stopping and taking pictures of retaining walls, and I've been doing it for a very long time. Figure 1 is one that's quite aesthetically pleasing. My daughter appreciates the Orca one that's up to the north of the Tulalip casinos. But I agree with my colleague that a combination of the greenery and some sort of aesthetically pleasing image, it makes a lot of sense, not only from the standpoint of breaking up the wall, but also from, I suspect, and although I'm a layperson in this regard, that it would help with noise attenuation and keep it from being reflected back as substantially. I do recognize that based upon some things that we've heard recently, that maintenance could be a consideration. And so this body is certainly going to keep that in mind as we move through this code. So thank you very much for bringing this to us. I also wanted to say thank you for having the code here related to, what's the word for timber, the timber pile.
Yeah, that's kind of a new one on me.
And timber laggings, thank you. Because this is a subject, as you recall, Steve, that came up during the Burkman Trail process. They did the piles, but then they used timbers to retain the backfill, and the concern amongst the adjacent residents was that, well, great, but with the treatment that was allowed on those timbers, after 15 years, those timbers would have to be replaced, or 20 years or so. So it's not a longer term solution, and quite aesthetically not appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Just my comments.
Okay, Councilmember Goldman, then Councilmember Cassover.
Yep, thanks. Thanks for bringing this to us. I very much appreciate it. I'm supportive. I have a comment and a question. My comment, I'm broadly in the same place as my colleagues in that I like the greenery aspect. And I would almost kind of flip the order, kind of similar to what Councilmember Bodie said, that the top priority should be some sort of vegetation. And then if for whatever reason vegetation is not feasible, then the backup option would be to have some sort of artistic design on the wall. My question is regarding maintenance. If these walls are on either of our 2 state highways, would the maintenance be the responsibility of the city versus WashDOT? And if it's part of the BRT project, would it be Sound Transit?
Well, it's that's probably an area where you can't really address in the regulations. I mean, we're going to get an application and we're going to judge it against these criteria. So you can't hold an applicant to something they don't have control over. You know, that and so I mean, I think we just have to, maybe working with the city attorney, kind of figure out what that line is. How far can you go to require things like where that fence is going to be on private property, that easement? Maybe these are things that have to be worked out in a permit agreement, become a condition based on discussion of that. But it's hard to go that far and say that these, you know, as the reviewer, that if you don't, you know, have a maintenance agreement, then, you know, we can't approve your permit.
Okay. And yeah, thanks again for bringing this to us.
Sure.
Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so I just want to be really clear and understand how this ordinance might apply to other jurisdictions. So is there any concern that either Sound Transit or WashDOT would not be subject to such an ordinance, or would that actually, you know, I just need to know that.
I think whoever the applicant is, the agency, you know, they're and they're coming in. If these regulations are adopted prior to their application being considered complete, I don't know of any state law that would exempt them from local regulations such as this. City Attorney Pratt, would you like to add anything to that?
Are scenarios by which Sound Transit or WashDOT would argue that you have to comply with a certain city regulation? We tried to draft this retaining wall ordinance so that we would get those arguments, but we would need to keep you apprised of revisions are made to whether or not we think they would have a valid.
I'm afraid I'm not able to hear Attorney Pratt.
Can you hear me now?
You want to come up here?
How about now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so there are a few scenarios that we think we would get arguments from Sound Transit or WashDOT where they would say we don't have to comply with these retaining wall regulations. Steve and I have worked on drafting the current draft so that they would not be able to successfully make those arguments. And we would keep you apprised as amendments and changes come into the ordinance, whether or not we think they would have valid arguments against it. So we are aware of that situation and we will keep you apprised as to the drafts and what we think about that.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate understanding more about that. And then my other concern really is a timing one. I don't have any idea how quickly Sound Transit might try to submit permit applications, but I just want to make sure that we have our timing, you know, right, so that there's no issues.
Yes, anybody else before I call in Councilmember Farahami and then Councilmember Lebo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Bennett, for the report. Just one question I have is there a minimum height that the retaining wall needs to be in order for this to kick in? Because I know that a lot of these walls taper from a height that's probably, we would all agree would probably require this, but then if it gets down to a foot, couple feet.
Yeah, usually that is something we could, just specify if we want to, because they are going to taper at some point. But I think the intent here is to apply to any retaining wall over like 4 feet. Well, I'll make a note of that, and City Attorney Pratt and I'll talk about whether that might be a good addition. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lebo, and then I see that we have our other council member with us. So Councilmember Riddle will follow Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Director Bennett. Just rather comments. Thank you for bringing this forward. I support it. I would encourage that, for example, when you look at height of wall, that even if it tapers below 4 feet, it still applies as to whether or not it's articulated in some other fashion. I would suggest that we look at low maintenance native plants as an option, or even in the photo here under figure 4, it looks like it's a Boston ivy or a creeper. Those tend to be very attractive and low maintenance. We have a hard time maintaining our landscape, and particularly in areas where, like on a busy highway of 522, that would be very challenging. Mm-hmm. So I would not, I would discourage permanent irrigation. I would discourage plants or decorative plants that require a lot of maintenance. I would also suggest that of the opportunities here, even if you have walls that are decorated, I would tend to lead towards, even in figure 3, which is a carved wall, so that it's more natural, mm-hmm. or that you consider that it's articulated, not necessarily a pattern, such as birds or trees, just because, as some of the other council members, you still end up with a concrete wall. That adding some greenery to it, even if it's articulated, would be beneficial. The other is there should be a consideration when we have these tall walls on a right-of-way like 522, that they account for and address sound. And that can be done through battering the wall or articulating the wall in such ways as, for example, bush hammered walls or butcher block walls that help to diffuse the sound in combination with plants or others such as ivies that are growing on the wall. So supportive of this. I think it's really just about getting down to the details.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I am having trouble with the internet, so I apologize if I disappear. Question about the limitation to public transportation projects. Is that intentional? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, I think the idea is that these are walls that occur in the public right-of-way, and the entities that would be doing this are either the city or other agencies that have jurisdiction over the road, state, potentially the county. So we can, if there's a scenario that you can think of where private entity is going to, build into the public right of way. We use the word transportation to, try to cover all of these scenarios, but certainly open to, the unanticipated things that might come up, and we can generalize the language if you want. But that was kind of the thinking that these types of larger walls are not going to, we're one of the aspects of the ordinance that says that private walls and public walls have to be separate. They can't be connected to each other. So that's kind of what our thinking was. I mean, if you have an example of the situation, certainly would be interested in that, Councilmember Riddle.
For sure. And I can't think of anything specifically, but I think perhaps benefit the general public and shall not be for private development gain may simply be enough. So I would consider that. And then as my fellow council members have mentioned, you know, can we make a greenery requirement? And if we do, let's think hard about what that requirement will be. You know, climate appropriate plants, is it evergreen? You know, there's a lot of pieces to that greenery that I think we should think through pretty thoughtfully before we commit to the language there. And then I think a couple more items, if you don't mind. When we speak of rockeries that are over 4 feet in height are not acceptable. If it's a terrace of 2 or 3 4-foot high rockeries, is that getting around this requirement?
I don't know. We can look at that because, you know, in some cases we probably should just define the height to encompass, you know, the total height of the structure or something like that. So appreciate the thought.
Yeah, or some maximum step back before it becomes kind of considered a slope versus a retaining wall. Mm-hmm. And then comment around the kind of anti-graffiti paint made me think of public art as another option to enliven these spaces. If it doesn't have to be fully green, can we make some sort of public art as an alternative to greenery? More like, I'm thinking more true art rather than sort of just the press panels, but I guess that's a question of what is art, and perhaps an art committee will have to answer that question. And the only other is a clarifying question on D, that private and public retaining walls should not be built integrally. I can't say that word tonight. I'm assuming that, as you just spoke of earlier, means that they're not structurally relying on each other or connected, but I was curious if we should have some more description there, since we're talking about private individuals that just, you know, they may not understand what that language means.
Yeah, we can look at that. I think, you know, hopefully that gets to the crux of the issue, that they're you know, that they're isolated, but maybe we can come up with some clearer language. You know, and I guess I just want to respond to the idea of public art a little bit, because, you know, the question of how involved we get in finessing these regulations and creating process, you know, it's going to affect when we can adopt this. So we do need to go through the SEPA process. We need to issue a non-project DNS on this. That's a 6 or 8 week project. So we have, you know, we have some things we need to do. You need to have a public hearing at some point on these regulations. But the more detail we get into, the longer it's going to take to, you know, we really need to be at a point where the council, you know, is generally has a consensus about what's going to be adopted before we do that SEPA. Otherwise, someone could point out that, well, you know, you did your determination based on, you know, this set of regulations, and then 2 weeks later, they were changed significantly. So the sooner the council can come to some basic consensus about the majority of what you want to adopt related to these regulations, the better, the more predictable our process will be. So,
thank you for that. I encourage council leadership to add this to COWS as necessary so we can move this forward quickly. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to ask another question. I do want to say I really appreciate Councilmember Lebo's focus on specific details and some ideas on how to integrate the greenery priority that some of my colleagues have mentioned with design features, so that it's not either or, it could be a combination of the two. And also the climate sensitive, low maintenance greenery that makes a lot of sense to me. A question I have is just on magnitude. Is there, and it's a question, is there a certain height and length or square footage combination where we would want to have a public meeting as part of our permit review process? So because there's a, you know, there's retaining walls and there's retaining walls. So I raise that as a question. The bigger, the taller and longer it is, the more there is community interest perhaps in commenting. I know that citizens can already comment on permit applications, but I was more thinking of something to that would be you know, hosted by the city to get public input. It's a question, not request at this point. So I just flag that.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Tom was gonna go and then I'll go back to you.
Just
Mayor French.
Just a couple of questions. One, Rockeries, question about gabion walls. Gabion?
Oh,
I know what you mean.
What's that?
I know what you mean.
Yeah, you know, thank
Yeah.
you. You know what I meant, not what I said. I do have concerns because I have seen some that are crumbling because the metal mesh has deteriorated over a period of time, and they're not required to use stainless steel or something that's really quite, you know, heavy. Are Rockeries separate from gabion walls, or I mean, would this? My preference would be for them to be excluded from any situation here, because aesthetically they're okay, but they seem sort of like a stopgap kind of temporary measure that have been utilized because they're cheap.
Yeah, I think the ordinance is leaning towards kind of eliminating those as a possibility, but we can make it clearer if that's what the council wants, you know, related to anything other than, you know, a cast in place or precast concrete wall, and that's pretty easy to change to make.
Okay.
And
then my follow-up question was about timing. Your comment was very appropriate, Director Bennett, about making sure that we don't get too far into the weeds, pun intended, potentially, or the ivy, because as we saw today in the Sound Transit Board meeting, some of these things are bearing down on us. And so I will look, and my colleague and council leadership will be looking to the administration and let you know, have you folks take the lead to help us understand if we need to add additional meetings, if we have to have discussions about these things, to make sure that we are doing this in a timely manner.
Thanks. Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. I think the idea of having some public input is good. I wouldn't necessarily make it a condition of the regulations, because the public input could then be heard by the city council and staff, who would be working with the agencies and provide input. To your point, the more challenging or difficult we make the regulation, the more hoops we'll have to jump through to get it in place. So I would encourage that we streamline it, but getting public input, I think, is valuable for our city council members and staff to communicate back to the agencies. The other, and I think Councilmember French mentioned that gabion walls can be useful if they're detailed properly. So I wouldn't go so far as to prohibit gabion walls, but rather that they be constructed properly. So there are some very expensive gabion walls that were done very well.
Fair enough.
They had picked rocks placed one by one.
The city is already dealing with some that are failing already. So on that creek project, Councilmember Cassover, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I really appreciate all of the comments of my colleagues. I too am leaning more towards greenery on the walls. I mean, I do like the idea of designed walls, if you see what I mean, but I do think that greenery assists in maintaining our community character, as well as potentially mitigating noise. But I am very concerned about timing, and I'll tell you why. We are dealing with an agency at the moment whose track record in moving projects at their own speed and for their own purpose is well understood. And we should not give them an opening to get around what we are wanting as a community. So I just urge my colleagues to be mindful of that and to let's all do our best to make this an easy, fast, careful process of getting this ordinance as we want it and passed. So
You froze up there as if you, there you go.
Oh, I just want to make sure my colleagues are thoughtful about that.
Thank you. Any other questions for Steve at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I
Yes.
have raised my hand again, if you'd be obliged.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think I just want to, I want to make sure that we understand that certain green walls, certain greeneries may be more attached to something similar like a gabion wall, that sort of thing. So I think I don't want us to restrict ourselves to simply cast in place or tilt up panels. I think that hamstrings us in many ways for some really innovative and unique opportunities. At the same time, we do need to move this quickly to get this into code in a reasonable amount of time. But I would like us to understand the different systems that we can use and be very thoughtful about picking which systems we include and exclude. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else not seeing any? Thank you, Steve. I guess you know what you got to do. And thank you, Kim, because I think you'll have a lot to do with this. So thank you very much. Okay. With that, we will move on to ordinance resolution for action. First up is Resolution 23-1852, authorizing the mayor to sign amendment number 1 to professional series contract agreement AG 21-002 with Transportation Solutions Incorporated for design and construction management services for the SR 104 and 40th Place Northeast project. Thank you, Andy. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, speaking of retaining walls, this item relates to, as you just mentioned, a proposed amendment to our design contract for the State Route 104 and 40th Place Northeast Roundabout project. And as I discussed at the meeting on January 12th, essentially the impetus for the amendment is that the original contract had a scope and an associated fee, and the scope of improvements that are needed have deviated from what was described in the original contract. And so the consultant has proposed the suite of services necessary to complete the project or complete design of the project, understanding what we do at this point in project development, which is roughly 60% design, or between 60 and 90%. And so at the meeting on the 12th, I had described how the largest source of those additional fees included in the amendment were related to the need for a retaining wall on the project's northeast and southeast quadrants. I kept on saying northwest and southwest, but I meant northeast and southeast, in case anybody goes back and watches the video. And among other changes, but that was the largest single source, and it inspired discussion of what were the design considerations that required the project footprint to expand in the particular locations I described. What alternatives were there, how constrained were we, and so forth. And so they're all good questions. I couldn't answer all of them at the time. I sort of deferred those to our design consultant, or mentioned I would need to have our consultant come and speak to you about those. And our consultant is here tonight, or the project manager for our consulting team. That's Kirk Harris of Transportation Solutions, Inc. So I'll just bring them up in a moment to answer any questions that that members have remaining. And I will also note, just for the record, that we've conducted a couple of site visits with members. We try to get site visits with members with all members scheduled this week per the mayor's suggestion at the last meeting. Could only make it work for 4 of them. Had some good discussions as part of those site meetings, and you know, I'm happy to share sort of the content of what was discussed there, and or you know, field any new questions that you may have. So Kirk, would you I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe I can, you know, have kind of tee you up to describe the design considerations behind. I think there were a couple of things that became there were sort of focal points of the last discussion. One of them was why the project footprint needed to shift in that sort of northeasterly direction, which created the grading impacts. Why couldn't it have, you know, moved, you know, more to the south and west areas within the right of way and abutting the right of way that were that are less impacted under the current design. And aside from a potential shift, was there a different, let's say, geometry of the roundabout, let's say a oval shaped roundabout that could help you know, minimize or avoid the impacts that that have created the need for these walls. So Kirk, if you could give just a, you know, I guess as succinct as you can, overview of the design factors that kind of drove, you know, shape the design to where it is now. And I suppose maybe that at that point we can open it up for questions based on what you hear or anything else that's come to mind since then.
Welcome, Kirk. You know, to be honest, I see you brought a lot of plans. Just lay them out on the floor and we'll take a look at them real quick, okay? I didn't want to carry them upstairs for nothing, so.
I don't travel light. Yes. Good evening, everyone. And so yes, thankfully we were able to meet with 4 of the council members on site and in an office, and where I was able to share a few of the papers along here, maybe not all of them, but to build on what Andrew was talking about with respect to what were some of the design constraints and design considerations of how we got to where we are today. In general, the design, there are certain design standards and requirements according to the Federal Highway Administration, as well as the Washington State Department of Transportation about roundabout design. Those factor into it, as well as the turning movements for large vehicles like large trucks and transit buses. Those factor into the design as well. For particular sites, you look at, well, what are some of the constraints, physical, topographic, environmental constraints, hills along the way. And in this particular site, there were, I'll say, 3 primary pinch points or locations that directed us on how we situated the roundabout itself. One of them was the tributary or McCormick Creek, which is a tributary to Lion Creek on the south leg of the intersection. That's probably the #1 constraint where we knew going into it, or at least, you know, as I began on it, is we don't want to cross that stream, if you will. And that opens up a whole nother set of design requirements, environmental regulations. And since the culvert crossing that's there is already identified as a barrier to fish passage, it's 24 inches in diameter. And so as the city has experienced in doing some of its other fish passage projects on Lion Creek, that was kind of a non-starter from a budgetary standpoint. And so anyway, so that's one pinch point, if you will. Another was really the alignment of 104 Ballinger Way as you're coming from the south on the leg as the road kind of comes downhill and makes a curve, if you will, kind of a left-hand curve as it enters that intersection area. As one is traveling through in a vehicle, you might not notice as much, but there's a concrete barrier. Some people call it a Jersey barrier on the right-hand side of the road. And that's situated atop an existing retaining wall that's there. The existing retaining wall is a fill retaining wall, so you don't see it, but the property owner that's adjacent to it at the intersection of 40th, the southern 40th and Ballinger Way, is that house is actually kind of situated in a hole, if you will. So from the roadway, you mostly just see the roof line of it.
So, and that building is it's on the order of 10 feet away from this retaining wall. And so that kind of provided another constraint to the just general design guidelines or the design approach to this roundabout entering this intersection area. So those are two constraints on the south half, if you will, of the roadway. And then we had another one that's sort of on the northwest quadrant between 40th and 104. There's a residential parcel there, it's pretty screened off with vegetation, which is great. But right behind it, there's a sport court that individual has on their property. And so we use that as essentially a limit that, hey, if we are going to acquire right away from various corners abutting the intersection, we're going to stay off of the fence line that abuts the sport court there, from the standpoint of, well, once you get into that, you basically have bought the entire feature of that private property. So those are kind of three physical constraints, but then it does get into the, well, why did you situate it where you did? And a lot of that has to do with entry speeds into the roundabout, and with the current speeds of the existing highway, it's basically too fast for having a roundabout operate at a safe speed. From a design standpoint, you are really required to develop alignments that deflect the vehicle in such a way that you're introducing it to slow down before it enters the roundabout, to be able to yield to oncoming traffic as it's circulating the roundabout. So whereas people are going in excess of 30 miles an hour today, sometimes quite a bit in excess of 30 miles an hour, we need them to be going 22 miles or less as you enter the roundabout. 22, 23 is kind of the ideal. It may be able to accelerate as it goes through parts of the roundabout. So that was another thing. And then just in general, as many of you, I'm sure, familiar with the intersection, it has a big dog leg as it's heading southbound around that south corner. And the further we situated the roundabout itself towards the south, we would be removing that deflection as you enter the roundabout, thus slowing people down. So essentially, the roundabout itself does need to impede traffic to some degree to make it a safer operation for both vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists that would be using the intersection. So those are sort of to kind of build on what Andrew said, sort of the general tenets of how we initially laid out the roundabout. Questions while we're at this point? Yes, Councilmember Leba.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
I'll get you in a second, Semra.
Oh, I will defer.
You'll defer. Okay, Semra, you're up, and then Councilmember Cassover, you have your hand again?
I do. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I don't see a hand up for
Yeah,
Semra.
I don't, Semra. Okay, go ahead.
I believe that was Cassover's hand, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for this explanation. And I have been looking at Google Earth to follow along here as you've been describing things. And I see the sport court and I see the Jersey barrier, and I know where that house is kind of lower there. But it was the speed comment that you made that caught my attention. I have long thought that we actually ought to, as a city, really lower the speed along much of Ballinger Way. And I wondered if the city were to do that so that the traffic was not coming into the roundabout, from the freeway, as it were, down into Lake Forest Park, at such a speed, whether that would make any difference at all to how you thought about planning this roundabout.
Thank you for the question. I would submit that the speed that we calculate when we design a roundabout is more about how the geometry is laid out than it is in the actual speeds that are experienced today. We take into effect the existing alignment of 104, let's say, coming from the south, and recognizing that we want them to slow down. We use the angle from the existing radius that's coming from the south, and how the various what we call R values as they work around the roundabout itself. So there are that first entry radius entering it is really a calculation of the highway or the main line alignment, and then that curve that enters that you would take to enter to take a right turn into the roundabout. So while some jurisdictions or some highways, let's say a 55-mile-an-hour highway, clearly you need to slow them down much further in advance of a roundabout. You might be doing introducing meandering or chicanes that enter the roundabout well in advance. This situation is, yes, people are going in excess of 30 miles an hour, but still the connection between the existing main line and this proposed roundabout design is satisfactory to meet all the design guidelines that the state and federal highways is looking for. So it would certainly help to lower the speed limits, up and down the corridor, but yet we factored in really the geometry to be a satisfactory, safe situation.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, but thank you.
Sorry. Councilmember Lebo, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Silva and Mr. Harris for the discussion and the tour this afternoon. It was very helpful and it was an engaging discussion. I understand the fee proposal and I will support the increase in the fee for this. I do have concerns though about the overall cost of the project and also want to be respectful of the council that previously authorized this work to go ahead. But again, I am concerned about the cost and I would ask the staff to consider that we do a current cost estimate. I believe that you have enough information within the design that a recognized cost estimator could in fact develop a cost estimate for our consideration. I think we may be surprised, and not in a good way.
Thank you, Councilmember Lebo, very much. Thanks for going out and taking the tour and stuff. So Councilmember Bodie, then Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for suggesting that we go out and look at the site. Both the information that has been provided verbally and the papers, as well as the site visit, have been very helpful. I also will support the increase, but I also became aware that this is a complex project with a lot of complex variables. And so I actually support the idea of trying to get a current cost estimate. On the other hand, the public safety issues are very apparent when you go out and do a site visit, because trying to make that left-hand turn onto Ballinger Way from either one of the two streets that come in at that intersection is a matter of darting across Ballinger fast and hoping that no one is going too fast in either direction to catch up with you. So I want to share Councilmember Lebo's comments. I would support this resolution or contract amendment at this point in time. But I also think there's a lot of questions and costs that we have to grapple with. I do think, though, that the public safety considerations are important ones. So how do we balance the complexity of the project with the public safety? It will be a challenge for all of us going forward, and finding the money from a good, perhaps state source. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excellent comments, colleagues. I appreciate all of those. And let me lead by saying apologies to both of you gentlemen. Some of us were stuck in the green room at Sound Transit today, waiting to get our turn to say our piece. And unfortunately, we have to juggle too many things going on. I apologize for leaving you hanging, Andrew. And we'll try to get it sorted out. A couple of thoughts. One, historically, this council probably knows, and I know the mayor knows this, that the original design of Lake Forest Park was to have 40th place. It was supposed to go straight through. But my understanding is that when the freeway system was built, the primary roads just sort of de facto became the winding left smaller area that's constrained by the topography. The other thing I just want to mention historically is that, and I've mentioned this before, but the speed limit up until about 1990 was 25 through that area. And comments have been made about by the vice chair and other folks about we are committed to figuring out a consistent speed limit for the corridor and making sure that it is safer. They raised the speed limit when they moved the bus stops for Lake Forest Park Elementary off of Ballinger Way. And they were looking for more throughput. I think one of the things that I think about as I walk around there or run or even drive through is that the orange warning signs say 20, I believe, for both of the curves that approach from the freeway end coming down. And regrettably, when you're walking, as Councilmember Bodie indicated, you see people going in excess of 30 miles an hour around some of those curves, which are incredibly dangerous. My question about the alignment is, if we're going to be doing, we've talked about retaining walls, if we're going to have to do this retaining wall on the Northeast corridor, how do we make sure that it doesn't become sort of a, I don't know how to describe it, but just sort of a pocket that is just lined kind of around that, and that it remains aesthetically appealing to the neighbors, to the people that are walking there. And obviously we have some design considerations that we're thinking about in terms of these kinds of things. But rather than having it just be something to hold back dirt, is it going to have to be a curved wall? Is it going to be able to be straight, or, you know, a bunch of radii coming around the curve?
Right. The ordinance that was raised here is very timely indeed. So yes, from a practical matter, it does need to hold up soil as a cut wall in order to have the roundabout footprint function. What goes on that face of the wall? So in my opinion, from other experiences, this kind of wall will be a soldier pile wall, just from the standpoint of not acquiring more right away than is necessary to do other types of tieback walls or other things. It'll mean drilling into the earth, let's say 20 feet to account for another 12, 15, maybe 30 feet, but it'll be pile. And then whether they are concrete lagging between timber pile that's coated with concrete fascia, or some other, you know, thing, the actual outside aesthetics is really up to the owner to decide what appeals to them, whether it's a mural, whether it's a stamped concrete, whether it's one of the illustrations was sort of the simulated rock style. Those are all sort of facades that go across the actual structural integrity that comprises the wall. And one of our first order of businesses is basically to provide a presentation, have our structural engineer provide a presentation to council or staff or parties that are interested on, okay, here's what we're faced with. What are there some particular forms or looks that you want to have incorporated before they get started? So I guess why I say that's for the owner to choice. And as I think Councilmember Lebo said, that all have cost components with them. And so you just say, well, which one would you like? You know, this one probably costs about this much per square foot. This was this one, this much per square foot. And so that's part of the decision making. As we were out in the field with Councilmember Bodie and others, we have allowed for some space between the back of sidewalk and the wall primarily for utility relocations. There are a couple clusters of above ground pedestals for telecommunications, Lumen and Comcast and a few others, as well as a utility pole for Seattle City Light. That utility pole for Seattle City Light will require a guy down wire to kind of make sure it's the overhead wires aren't pulling it in through the intersection. So there's going to be some space required between the back of walk and the face of wall. Within that space, we have requirements for these utility relocations, but we also afford some opportunity to install some plantings as well that can, be incorporated into however that's done as well. Obviously plants need a certain space as they grow and everything, but yet part of the plant selection then would be identified, well, what works Some plants are accepted by utilities to work underneath wires, you know, from a growing standpoint or whatever. So that's part of the decision. And so that can help soften things as well for us to consider going through. So our landscape architect, who is part of the supplement request as well, as part of that conversation with staff and council members, or again, interested parties on, well, what do you want to have incorporated into this project within the spaces that are available?
Thank you very much. And just one last comment, apropos of the comments of my colleagues about a cost estimate. This project originated with a TIB representative actually driving through our city and saying this is a perfect place for a roundabout. So it's wonderful that we had their support and their financial support. So I agree with my colleagues that getting a cost estimate is, when I made my apologies to Mr. Sylvia earlier today, I suggest that we talk about also the source of funding that we already have retained. And we, as policymakers, need to be looking at, as Councilmember Bodie suggested, where we can get additional funds to make this project happen, because I believe very strongly, as many of my colleagues do, that safety is a real serious concern at that intersection. Thank you very much.
Before I call on Tracy, I know you're sitting there, Semra, and I'm just going to say it for you. On that wall, we could do some artwork, because I know you were thinking it. I know you're pretty good by now, so which I agree. I'm kind of thinking we need to put a reader board so everybody can see what's going on in the city, because that's
and that'll be a violation of the sign code.
I know, but we could. I'm thinking, you know, we have a hard time getting the word out. That would be a really good idea. But Councilmember Fairtime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Sylvia and Mr. Harris, for your presentation. And I really appreciate the tour that you took us on this afternoon and the vigorous discussion afterwards. The question I have is, you're familiar with the 2018 Safe Highways report. In it, one of the recommendations for SR 104, Ballinger Way, is in fact buffered bike lanes. Would the roundabout, the way that it's designed now, preclude the continuation of the bike lanes through that area?
No, it would not preclude. So the roundabout itself, bicycles are provided the opportunity to either share the lane with vehicles, motor vehicles on the roundabout itself, or exit the shoulder that's out there today and be on a shared use path, which in this case is the sidewalk. There are variable widths that are on roundabouts. And this particular roundabout, we have an 8-foot sidewalk width, which is the minimal width allowed for a shared use facility around the perimeter of a roundabout. We took quite frankly the footprint of the area, and recognizing the sensitive nature of McCormick Creek and other things, is like, okay, well, where we could minimize the footprint of the roundabout, let's do that. So one of the things that went from hey, optimal shared use path of 12 feet, well, let's go down to the minimal of 8 feet. So in your case, yes, the bicycle facilities on each leg of the roundabout, we'd be able to enter this shared use path and circle and then cross at across each leg of the roundabout. And in this case, they would be crossing, looking in the direction of traffic. There is what we call a splitter island or a median refuge at each of the legs. That's a minimum width of 6 feet. It's actually tapered. Some are a little wider than 6, but that way a pedestrian or a bicyclist that's crossing, they only have to look really at one direction of traffic. They can stop, pause, and then look at the other direction of traffic before continuing on.
Well, thanks. And we all saw the examples today of a couple of daredevil bicyclists trying to go northbound on that, and really glad that you're addressing it. Thanks.
Do you have any questions, Councilmember Goldman?
No questions. I also wanted to thank you for answering our questions earlier and taking us on the tour. Yeah, I had some concerns after the meeting 2 weeks ago, but those have all been addressed. So I'll be supporting this amendment.
Okay, Councilmember Casso, do you have your hand up again?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to thank Mr. Sylvia and our consultant for their work here, and apologize for not being able to join you today. As my colleagues know, I'm recovering from some surgery and are currently not very mobile. So maybe Mr. Sylvia could take me on a little tour coming up. It is, this roundabout site is in my, close neighborhood, and I do walk in that direction fairly often. So I'm very aware of the public safety issues that are there. And I also am hopeful that this would be a project that could be eligible for a variety of federal and state support, particularly because it could be considered part of a Safe Routes to School plan. So, I hope that city staff and my council colleagues will help really think that through and identify some opportunities that.
Oh no. You froze again. I think we know.
You're back.
You're back. Thank you. How's that? I think we got the idea what you were saying. Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Furtani.
I'd like to move, let me get this right here. Resolution 23-1882, the amendment to the Transport Solutions Incorporated contract.
Second.
Okay, resolution 23-1882 has been moved in second. Do I see any further discussion? Yes.
And since I moved, I made the motion, I can't really speak against it. So of course, you know that I'm going to be in support of it. But this was tough decision for me because, ultimately what it came down to was a very large increase in the fee. And, I was torn because of course, on the one hand, I didn't want to feel like the city was sold the bill of goods where we were asking for one thing and all of a sudden it became this other thing that became much, much more expensive. And I think some of my council member colleagues have in fact, echoed my comment there. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to fall for the fallacy of sunk costs in the sense that we've already spent this money. We need to throw more money. The council member Cassover put it correctly that this is a public safety issue. And ultimately, we're going to have to solve it anyway. And the fact is that I don't think we're going to get a much different set of bids or whatever if we were to redo this all over again. So at this point, I'm in favor of it just because we really do need to address this pressing safety issue. I want to point out that in the Safety Highways report, there's been 13 collisions and reported in the past 3 years, that's of 2018, 7 collisions where vehicles hitting an obstruction. So if we can basically save some people a lot of hassle and trouble, and especially the homeowners in that area, the same issues, I think, we need to do it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of Ordinance 23-1263, I'm wrong one. Resolution 23-1862, authorizing the mayor to sign amendment number 1 to the professional service contract agreement AG 21.002 with Transportation Solutions Incorporated and Design. Please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Aye. Any abstain? Any nays? Pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Very much. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
I'm going to, since you guys voted now, say a couple of things. One, I apologize for getting cranky a couple of weeks ago, but I'm a true believer that walking out and seeing stuff is a really good way to go. And I am asking you too, with what we got coming up with Sound Transit, get out and look at the properties people are talking about, because it's pretty eye-opening what you see. So go do that. Thank you for approving this. The previous council, and we did have some different things. There's a reason Andy is here, and we have a different staff because we're learning some lessons. And I'd like to thank Councilmember Lebo for all your knowledge and stuff, because you asked the right question to help us get through some of that. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to move on. Andy, you can go home and do it this time. Remember last week I got cranky? Get out of here. Okay. Thank you, council, very much. And Vicky, I was going to tell you, we didn't steal any of those pictures in the previous thing we were talking about. With those were our own pictures. I asked that when I first saw them. I said, did we borrow these from Vicky? And no, we went out and got our own. So the pictures of the walls is what I'm talking about. So thank you. I know. So
We can ask Vicky to help on the roundabout wall too.
Okay. Okay, council, let's move on to resolution 23-1883, authorize the mayor to sign the American Rescue Plan Act APPA grant agreement between the city and Local 104.
Thank you, Mayor. And I have nothing new to report from 2 weeks ago, just that before the council tonight is resolution 23-1883 that would authorize the mayor to sign a contract to
give up to $100,000 to the local 104 in response to the COVID pandemic. This is for outdoor dining. This project actually started almost 2 years ago. There were some not code amendments, but there's some work with the surrounding property owner to get approval to encroach somewhat into the rear setback with this outdoor dining. This enhances their ability to serve more patrons that want to sit out there. This is only for that structure. They had an existing structure out front that was pre-COVID, so we didn't even look at that, but this would cover the structure, and the covering for the structure, as well as outdoor heating and the necessary improvements to their electrical panel, et cetera, to do that. And so I'm happy to take any questions from council tonight.
Any questions for Phil? Okay, go ahead, Tom.
I'd just like to go ahead and move resolution 23-1883, authorizing the mayor to sign the American Rescue Plan ARPA grant agreement between the city and local 104.
Second.
Okay, resolution 23-1883 has been moved in second. All those, any discussion? See none on screen or here. All those in favor of resolution 23-1883, please say aye.
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 Any nays? Nope, passed unanimously. Thank you very much, council. And with that, we will bring up our finance director, and she's going to discuss ordinance 23-1262.
If the city clerk would pull up my presentation really quickly. We will go over a brief presentation outlining ordinance 23-1262. Oh, do I not? Can you help me go through the slides? That's fine. So we're going to go over the finance budgeted positions. To the next slide. For the finance department of the city of Lake Forest Park. There we go, buying a little time. Okay, but so the reasons for the budgeted position discussion in the finance department is, as we celebrated earlier this evening, we do have a retirement taking place in the finance department of an employee that's been here for over 20 years. We also have an additional 0.4 FTE that was adopted in the 23-24 budget. And with those two changes, it naturally seemed like an appropriate time to take an evaluation of the structure of my department. And so with that, walking to the next slide, the current org chart, finance department org chart, which is also attached in the agenda cover, is the finance director. It goes myself, and then the payroll and utility billing analyst reported directly to me, the accounting supervisor, and the IT systems manager. And then below the accounting supervisor was the accounting clerk, the two accounting clerks that we have at 0.6 FTE, which is currently a total FTE count of 5.2. And then if we walk to the proposal, the current, what's being proposed in the request of this amendment of the ordinance is this structure, being the finance director, then it walks down to the accounting supervisor, and then it walks into a new position that we're calling the finance specialist. But that will have two positions, will be called the same title. So hopefully we can make sure that it works in the most effective and efficient way for the city and the department. And then we will also have still an accounting clerk at the 0.6 FTE. This mirrors exactly the adopted 5.6 FTE that was adopted in the original budget. So then if we walk to the final slide, where the dollars and the budgeted positions come in, currently the top table of the accountant and the utility billing and payroll analyst, those two positions, what we're proposing is taking it to what we are now calling a finance specialist, merging those two steps. So step one, you'll take the two steps and merge it, which is presented on the screen. And then you will, and then you would do that across for the two positions. And then it shows the annual, and that's the monthly salary, which is how we adopt the on the salary schedule. That's why it's being presented that way on the first table. And then the second table is the annual salary. And then the total, there isn't a net change. So the total budgeted for those two positions for the finance department was the $156,980. And what's currently still being proposed is the $156,980. And so that really is the summary of the whole request, is just to change the structure, very similar to what other departments have previously done when they've been in similar situations where people have retired, or it's very similar to what the police department did with the lieutenants. It was a new chief, it was an appropriate time. Public Works has done something similar in recent history, and now it's finance's turn. So here we are with the request this evening. And at this point, I would just go ahead and ask, are there any questions or comments?
Any questions for Lindsay? Anybody on the screen? Anybody up there? I don't see any. Anybody like to move this? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Lindsay. This makes a lot of sense to me. And I'd like to go ahead and move Ordinance 23-1262, amending the 2023-2024 budgeted positions and salary schedule for the finance department.
Second.
Okay, it's moved in second. Any discussion? Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, as this is only our second touch, I would like to move that we suspend our 3-touch rule for Ordinance 23-1262.
Second.
Okay. Moving in second to remove the 3-touch rule on Ordinance 23-1262. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, it's been unanimous. Then from there, we go on to, it was moved in second for Ordinance 23-1262. Do I have any other discussion on Ordinance 1362? Yes, Councilmember Furutami.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Vaughn. I really appreciated your presentations in the what was it, the Committee of the Whole meeting, where you were able to outline exactly why this change was needed and what the benefits to the city would be, and they're fairly clear. And this is, as you said, a great opportunity to get this kind of thing done. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of Ordinance 23-1262, please say aye.
Aye.
Ayes, passed unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for, you actually have an entire new staff now after. Yeah.
We're getting there.
So thank you very much. It's been a lot of work and I appreciate it. And thanks for getting everybody together tonight. And thank you. Okay, council, we're on to any other business? Anybody got new business? I think we have all kinds of business. Yes.
Yes, so I would like to point out, so we canceled our committee of the whole this past Monday. And in February, we don't have a committee of the whole because it would fall on President's Day. Earlier today, we heard about the time-sensitive nature of the retaining wall ordinance. So I'd like to ask, do we want to, either for this Monday, January 30th or February 6th, have a special committee of the whole to discuss the retaining wall ordinance? And also what we missed this past Monday.
It's up to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks, Councilmember Goldman. I was going to bring that up in my council member comments.
Oh, sorry.
Report. No, you're good. Let's just get right to it. Yes, I was aware that that the meeting in February is going to, I would like to actually reschedule it because we were talking about attempting to have a council dinner for the committee the whole evening. However, because of the cancellation, I apologize to all of you for having to do that. As some of you know, my better half tested positive for COVID, and I was feeling very poor myself. Turned out to be something else, but I tested negative 5 or 6 times. And out of abundance of caution on Monday, I didn't want to risk coming here and exposing you all. And
But you did.
It's night. But my better half is still quarantined, and I just got a text that my 7-year-old actually put herself to bed. So that was I was worried, not about any of the ordinance this night. I was more worried about my daughter getting to bed in a timely manner. But yes, colleagues, next Monday was one that I was thinking that we could consider. That would mean notification very directly. It would have to be considered a special cow, and there's very specific requirements surrounding that. Is next Monday available for you all to attend so that we could consider carrying on with this discussion about the specifically focused on the wall ordinance? If we have additional time, we might be able to make sure we can have it on the agenda, because we're not allowed to talk about anything that's not on the agenda in a special meeting. Thoughts, comments?
I would just, is the 6th of February available, just so that we have a little more time to be prepared?
Colleagues?
I wanted us to also map out a meeting where we could act on it. So what would that schedule be? Because that seems to inform the timing of the cow meeting.
Mr. Hill, would you chime in on this one, please?
Sorry, I was speaking to the city attorney, so could you repeat the question?
So the question is whether or not we could have a meeting where we could actually take action on, but we remember we will have to have a public hearing. So we could make the recommendations and then schedule the public hearing. But how quick a schedule is acceptable and prudent?
Is there a possible timeline of dates that we could consider and then schedule the cow meeting accordingly, quick, either the 30th or the 6th?
We could certainly backtrack and get, how long SEPA notice, that kind of thing, and give you a sort of a drop dead date. Is that what you're looking for?
I'm looking for our fastest possible workable timeline.
Let's do this just for clarity. Is the 6th of February, as Mr. Lebo suggested, acceptable to the group?
Yeah.
Colleagues online?
I think either day would work for me. 30th or the 6th, whatever it is.
Either works for me.
Okay, myself as well. Vice Chair
and for me too. Either works for me.
Okay. I'm happy to defer to Mr. Lebo on this. It gives a little bit additional time for notification to make sure that we have our ducks in a row for a special meeting. So February 6th for committee of the whole, special committee of the whole, if you will. And then on that Thursday, we can handle some of the additional things that we need to do relative to moving it forward and procedurally. Is that a reasonable thing? Okay. Is that good for everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman, for bringing that up.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any council committee reports? Have we had any council meeting reports? Okay, council member reports.
I'm going to let Councilmember Casso, or Vice Chair Cassover speak before me, because I'm losing my voice about our interactions with Sound Transit today. If you wouldn't mind, Philippa, and chime in as well.
No, that would be perfectly fine. I'll leave my video off to see if that solves some of my internet connection problems. Deputy Mayor French and I both signed up to make public comment at the Sound Transit Board meeting today. It was unfortunate that not only was our topic part of the agenda, but also the international district is also still a very big topic for the Sound Transit Board. And there were many, many folks from the Asian community there, many of whom needed interpreters. So their comment period, they took up a lot of the comment time. And so the county executive, who is also the chair of Sound Transit, had to delay a half of the public comment to later in the afternoon. So unfortunately, both my comment and Deputy Mayor French's comments occurred after the board had in fact taken the vote, which was really just too bad and really quite aggravating, to be honest with you. My comment and Councilmember French's comment and the comment of a couple of other folks from Lake Forest Park were really focused on the fact that we have not had the kind of communication and interaction with Sound Transit that makes for a really robust, transparent, and useful partnership. And so my comments were directed to the board to ask them to direct their staff to do a better job, frankly, of engaging with the city, both with city administration and with our community. So the board did vote to go ahead with the purchases of the properties along Bothell Way that they say they need. There was quite a lot of discussion by the board members and questions of their staff about the real need for those purchases. And it was raised by some of our citizens that they would prefer to see a queue jump type solution rather than an extra bat lane. We found the, I'm just going to be honest with you guys here, we found the explanation of why alternatives were not examined by the Sound Transit staff to be pretty weak, and hope that maybe we can get more conversation going with them about some of that. The good news is, though, that there does seem to be quite a lot of support on the board and you know, activity from the staff in helping us create a much more aesthetically pleasing project than had originally been presented to us. So I'm pleased about that. But anyway, not the happiest of days, and it's a bit disappointing that the staff at Sound Transit have not been as transparent and open as we would have hoped. Anything to add, Councilmember French?
Thank you very much, Philip. I appreciate that. A couple of thoughts. One, I would say, for full transparency, I was very unhappy with Faith's and Bernard's responses to the questions by the board members, including board member Keel had asked for some very specific things from Faith, and she promised them and didn't deliver. And I think that the board members, including Chair Constantine, asked, although he asked, I believe, just one question, but the other board members, Councilmember Balducci, Keel, Up the Grove, and Baker asked some important questions, and there were definitely snippets in there that indicate that they are listening to what we are discussing with them. And my comments actually dovetailed very well, I think, with Vice Chair Cassover's about accountability with staff. And this is not a partnership if we are not getting the information that we need. And I think that the other thing that I reasserted was that it is the, because of, I didn't say this in the comments, but this was my response to the comments out there in the community, broader community, that there are members of Lake Forest Park community that are trying to stop this project, that this community is committed to mass transit. It's just a question of what that looks like, and making sure that we get, as Vice Chair Cassover said, getting the best possible project with environmental mitigation, reducing the number of trees that are being removed. And right now, I would be quite happy to actually have that a diagram that actually shows that without having to go through 300 or 400 pages of diagrams with an expert. It's been requested, and I do believe they're listening to us. I think that there's the question is whether or not we can continue to encourage them to hold staff's feet to the fire relative to Sound Transit's interaction with us. I found it, and I use this word multiple times today, so I'm wearing it out, but I'm going to use it again here publicly. I found Mr. Bernard's comments completely disingenuous about the interactions both with the public, and I take offense to his assertion that there has been, and I can't quote this directly, so I will paraphrase, that there has been a considerable interaction with elected officials. I believe he's conflating his interactions potentially with Bothell, members of Bothell and Lake Forest and Kenmore elected officials potentially on the board or otherwise. And no disrespect to them, but anecdotally, I'm not seeing it, and I think it was disingenuous for him to make that claim. And from my perspective, I believe that the members of the board were skeptical about his assertions in that regard. So the level of questioning by them was more than we saw at the expansion committee meeting. I was disappointed that they didn't hold them accountable from the standpoint of what they promised in terms of information regarding the number of square feet, the takings, et cetera, et cetera. And the final thing I will say before my voice gives out here is that it was monumentally disappointing that we were not able to make our comments in advance of the vote. And as I was speaking, I was watching Chair Constantine, and he was clearly, I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but he was clearly concerned about the fact that the topics that we were referring to had already been acted upon. So that indicates to me too that Dow and the other members of the board are listening to us. My fervent hope is that the conversations will be ramped up radically, and they won't continue to throw numbers out there that claim thousands of interactions with the community.
Thank you.
Could I speak to this topic also? Because I did speak at the previous two Sound Transit board meetings and address the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, the disproportionate number of impacts in our city for the total project. In other words, we're bearing most of the environmental impacts and property acquisitions of residential properties, which is unprecedented in the rest of the BRT corridor. And I also submitted, because I was out of town, written comments to that effect to the expansion committee. I'm glad that we're getting some responsiveness at this point, some awareness among the board members. I was hugely disappointed by the notice that Kenmore put out, which I thought was completely incorrect. I'm hugely shocked by the continued responses from people like Faith and Bernard saying things which to me are really untrue and inaccurate. Let's say they're kind of sticking with some letter of contact if like there were so many hits on the website or something, but completely disingenuous. So it's very frustrating to me. And I really urge our city staff to be assertive and skeptical. I want things in writing, you know, to make sure that we are actually, you know, communicating well. I'm reminded how long it took us to get that partnership agreement, because there wasn't really a good partnership in getting that partnership agreement together. And so I hope things are taking a turn for the better, but I think we have to continue to push hard as council members and as our city staff to try to make sure we get things the way they are. I would like our city to consider posting a monthly update on our Notify Me system, not necessarily having a big public meeting to hear from people that we've already heard from. We have, and by the way, I want to thank the members of the community who submitted dozens and dozens of just really smart, effective, pithy, you know, correct comments about the project. So we have received all those, we've read all those, or we'll shortly finish reading all those. There are so many. I noticed a few extras I hadn't gotten to as I was coming to the council meeting. So thank you to the community for keeping the pressure on us and on Sound Transit. I really appreciate it. But I would think that it would be helpful for our city to do kind of a monthly, it doesn't have to be very lengthy, but a monthly update for the community so they can kind of hear what is happening. And so we're transparent as well. So I make that suggestion for you, Mr. Mayor, this, City Administrator Hill and my colleagues to consider. So that's about it. I don't want to keep ranting about how frustrating this is. Thank you
for your time.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Bodie, for bringing up the members of our community who've been emailing us continually, and we really do appreciate the comments. I'm sorry if we don't get back to you personally, but that is the volume of comments we've been getting. It's been amazing. So thank you so much for putting your passion and heart into these things. I sent myself a letter to the Sound Transit Board, and I did ask that they communicate much better. It would be nice if they had a town hall style meeting in person sometime very soon. I'm hoping next month. And the other comment that I made was, yes, I also agree with Councilmember Bodie that there was an unfortunately worded article in the Kenmore newsletter. And, we've done so much good work with Kenmore and our neighboring communities that, this should not poison that well. And I ask if any Kenmore City Council members or staff want to come talk to me and basically find out what's going on here. I'm really happy to reach out to them and talk to them. I know that Deputy Mayor French has already made some contacts in that fashion, and I think only by talking do we get through these kinds of things. So really want to encourage you to reach out to us. Thanks.
Didn't we hear that there was going to be a town hall meeting on February 3rd, like when at the Sheridan Beach meeting? Didn't they say there was going to be a town hall meeting the first week in February? Anyway, I'm just saying when they have been promising a town hall meeting for a long time.
One other quick comment on point, if I may, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Furtani's comment about the unfortunate message from our neighbors to the northeast. Yes, that has already been discussed to a certain degree. And I would assure my colleagues that I do not believe that there was any ill intent, and I personally am going to assume positive intent, as unfortunate as it was. But I can also say that I don't think it'll happen again.
Yeah, I just want to follow up. So yeah, I've heard vague ideas that there would be a February public meeting with Sound Transit, but no details have arisen yet. So I think it's something that city staff should be following up on because yeah, February is in 6 days. I appreciate messages from the community. While I haven't been able to attend the Sound Transit meetings, I wrote a letter. I'm planning to write a second letter, just urging better communication, which hasn't really improved. I think part of the disconnect is we do have city staff that are meeting with Sound Transit regularly. The problem is the information's not being disseminated to the public. And while I think that should be Sound Transit's responsibility because this is Sound Transit's project, perhaps there comes a time when if Sound Transit just isn't going to be posting enough information and documents, then, and I know our city staff are overworked as it is, and I hate to pile more requests on you, but maybe the city needs to fill the gap that Sound Transit has left and start posting documents. For instance, I'm told there are some maps, some additional maps that Sound Transit has sent the city. They haven't, at least I searched the website, I could not find them, but I'm pretty sure these are public maps. And so if Sound Transit's not going to post them for the public, maybe we should be posting them for the public in advance of this February meeting. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn regarding that, but yeah, I want to see better communication. I also want to emphasize that we are pro public transit. And we're not trying to just obstruct the project. We want to make sure the project serves the community as well as it can, but not just Lake Forest Park, the whole corridor. But it's important that we have that dialogue in order to be able to make sure the project actually is serving our community and the neighboring community as well. So yeah, whatever we can do to just keep nagging Sound Transit until they start actually having proper dialogue with us. I'll stop ranting now.
Any other council committee reports?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just want to catch you. I'm going to turn my video off just in case I have internet problems. I did attend a solid waste meeting, and there's a couple of items there that I do want to make sure we are staying up on. Let me see here. So there has been a pilot on plastic wrap that took place over 5 months with drop-off bins at many grocery stores in the region. And the good news is that 25 tons of plastic wrap were dropped off, 95% of which will be recycled. And the recycling organization is Martin Plastics up in British Columbia. So what they do is to actually turn it into more plastic wrap. So it's just that you know that that is actually happening. We did have a legislative update too on what's going on at the legislature, and the big thing that I'm following and that we're all following in solid waste is what's called the RAP Act, which is this puts the onus on the suppliers and manufacturers of packaging to in fact pay for the recycling rather than us having to pay for it. And it would include a beverage deposit system, which, you know, is not so great here in King County because we already are able to recycle our bottles and cans, but that's not true in the rest of the state. So particularly with glass bottles. But we are the only state on the West Coast without a beverage deposit system. So there are advantages, and it would increase recycling statewide. And it would also help keep the stream of materials clean and reuse the glass. So, you know, there's probably good things about it. The other, let me see, plastic pollution reduction. We're ahead of the game here because one of the things that this would do is require bottle refill stations in new construction. And we already have one in City Hall. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But it would also phase out those mini toiletries at hotels, but also ban foam-filled docks and floats, which is probably something that we in Lake Forest Park should pay attention to given our lakeside properties. The problem with those foam-filled docks and floats is that the foam tends to disintegrate over time and causes pollution in the water. So yeah, there's a lot of bills out there, and I'll keep you up to date with those as they actually come into reality. And then the other thing that's going to happen in the area of solid waste is that the comp plan for the division of solid waste has to be updated. And it's the long-term waste disposal option, you know, what it is we're going to do to replace the landfill. That will be the main topic. And so I will keep you up to date with that as it goes along. So I think that's probably enough for tonight. And the rate restructure is something that I need to make sure that city staff is being kept up to date with that, and that we as a city are ready for that when we have to actually approve new contract for solid waste.
Yes.
Just one quick thing. I would be remiss in not, since we've had a lot of serious topics, giving a shout out to the chief and Diego for their big plunge, and Diego's dog and Chief's daughter jumped into frigid water at Sheridan Beach Club for the Rotary Club for eradication of polio. And there was some squealing and screaming, but that was only the chief. So, but the dog did go in too. Diego's dog went into the water. And the good news is it only snowed 20 minutes before you guys got in the water. So my wife said that if the water didn't kill me, she would kill me if I got home after jumping in the water. So I wisely stayed out of the water this year. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Yes.
I have another public transit. This is Metro, King County Metro. I attended an open house earlier this week regarding the Linwood Link connections restructure. This is separate from the BRT project. This is Metro changing its routes when Link gets to Shoreline and Linwood. I just wanted to briefly summarize how the plan would affect Lake Forest Park. The 522 bus would no longer go to Roosevelt. Instead, it would turn and go to Shoreline 145th Street. Route 331, which currently goes along Ballinger Way, would turn, will go along Ballinger and then turn up to Montlake Terrace Station. The 372 would be split into two different buses. One would go from Shoreline and then turn by Lake City Way and go down to the university. And then there would be a separate bus which would start around Fred Meyer and head up towards Kenmore. So somewhat substantial changes, but looking to broadly have better connections between us and Shoreline and us and link stations at the cost of some connections to Lake City. There's 2 more open houses in February if you want to attend, and also there's a survey where you can submit comments to them about there's a whole lot of routes that are changing.
Thank you. Yes.
Councilmember Goldman, just a question. You were concerned about the fact that in the original ST3 proposal, there was a 145th Street station that was called for, that Sound Transit eliminated, even though it was in what the voters voted for. I'm mindful of the fact that our zoning in that area along Bothell Way allows 5 or 7 story buildings to be built. So the possibility in the future that there could be a lot more residents of Lake Forest Park wanting to take advantage of that bus stop. I wonder if you could share with us some of your latest thoughts and what your update is.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a personal gripe of mine, since my neighborhood won't be able to directly access the BRT without walking all the way down to 30th Avenue. So we won't be able to get the Sound Transit bus, but in Metro's plan, the successor to the 372 will serve that stop. So that intersection of 145th and Bothell Way will still have direct service to Link. It won't be the Stride line, but it'll be a Metro line, assuming that stays in the plan.
Thank you.
But yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody up on the screen? Seeing none. 3 things. 1, I need volunteers. I have openings in every dang thing, even civil services coming up, library board. Just tell people. People aren't, I've got some interviews next week, but COVID just shut everybody down. So you need to talk to your friends, start looking around, say whatever you can. I put it out in all my newsletters. So just please try to find people, especially we got a couple. I'll try to, like I said, I think I have some for the Planning Commission, some for the Parks Board and stuff. And I think we need to get the Park Board running, because we are trying to get money to start, going out to get money to start planning the park.
We're desperate.
Yes, we need to. So everybody just look for people.
And it will be a fun year doing master
yeah.
planning. So tell your friends.
Number 2, I had not so much the pleasure, but because I'm mayor, I spent the evening down here Friday night during the police SWAT standoff. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, this chief. I have to say, I was very impressed. The North End SWAT team has people from Mount Lake Terrace, Redmond. There was cops from 8, 9 different places, State Patrol. It ended well. It was a lot going on, but I was very proud of our officers who started the whole thing. We're very fortunate to have people like that. And I will tell you, it takes everything in the world for a town like us of 13,400 people to have a SWAT team be able to come and do what they did. So I'm very, and Chief, and the officers know how much I appreciate what they did. And like I said, I got to see everything, and it's interesting to be able to in the inside and see all that, and I was very proud of them. And number 3, I'm going to talk about Sound Transit. Here's the deal. I'll go back to 12 years ago when I became on the council. This city was looked at and frowned out. We had no connections to any city. None. We had a very bad reputation, especially after the first 4 years we were here. I spent my first 4 years trying to get relations built up, and I did a great job. And then Sound Transit. Realistically, most people in Lake Forest Park voted for Sound Transit. We're all in agreement with that, right? I'm going to look just out here at all you. We did vote for it. And I was one of those elected officials that sat there at the beginning, and we were the ones that talked about the bat lanes all the way through. That's what we were put up with, and we thought, it's a great idea. And I voted for every single one. So did the councils ahead of it. We voted for everything. The Yellow Jackets that showed up today that were mad from Kenmore, one of the leading people is sitting on my council right now. She was part of that. It was a big deal people really got together. It gave our citizens, we got all together to ban for the North End for rapid transit. It was a big deal. And we did good. And I got some really good connections. We really got along, the mayors and everything. The letter from Kenmore isn't so much the city, it's not the cities. It's people in Kenmore pissed off at us. We got to be honest. They put in a lot of money. Kenmore put all their money into widening the road. Bothell did too. We can't sit up here and think we're better than everybody and not everybody else has opinion. The people in Kenmore and Bothell don't have to like us because we do this, but they have the right to be pissed off. So don't be mad at Kenmore. Be mad at the truth that that's really what it is. People, you know, I talk to people. You're shaking your head. Do you think Bothell people are really excited about this? I'm just saying that, well, but they had the alternative to make their opinion. Okay, I'm telling you where we at 8 years ago when we started on this. Okay, right now, I understand. That's why I go out and I'm trying to get you don't hear me talking much because I don't have much of a choice. My job as mayor is to run the city. The staff never stops working on sound transit. We don't have an opportunity. We have to be working all the time, no matter which way it goes. We got to be ready to do the best job we can for the city. We get thrown under the bus all the time. They stand sound transit. I'm sitting there. I know exactly what goes on around here. It's a lot of work, but I don't know how to put this except we're working on it. And, you know, everybody thinks sound transit. Well, you know, it's not so easy to get the wall taken care of. You have to get sound transit working with WSDOT, which we are working through, but it's not just, hey, how you doing? And then we come up to what these bonds and these things that have worked together for all of us was the SWAT team. I still depend on every one of those cities. We need them. The crisis center that we're so all proud about right now is all those cities that we worked with before and that we've grown to have the relationships with. So I'm just saying that I will take responsibility because I, 8 years ago, thought this was the perfect thing in the world. And there was a lot of meetings and I know everybody, but it's been going on for a long time. I've sat through a lot of stuff. And yes, I was really shocked when I saw some of the stuff and we are working on it. But I will do everything I can not to let this damage all the work I put in to having good relations and all the good things we have out of this. The crisis center is going to be fantastic. And the SWAT team did a fantastic job. I need them. We need them. The police, we all work together, the fire department. So I'm resting telling you guys that we're working on, I'm doing my best to make sure that we keep the staff moving. It's a lot of work and we are doing what we can and we want it better, but we have to, I can't sit here and trash sound transit. I'm not going to trash Kenmore. I'm not going to trash anybody. I'm going to work with them the best way I can to get the best project that we can. And I hope that I'm alive when it gets done and it looks beautiful and everything's growing like we want. We all know what we want and I hope it works out. Because, you know, one thing that really annoys me is people don't realize I live 100 feet off of Bothell Way. And I will guarantee you, I've driven up that road. I started driving up when I was 13 years old, so I've probably driven it 47 years at 20 times a week, figure it out. I know that road like the back of my hand. I can tell you every street right now that's dumped and the stumps that are laying on the side of the road, whose houses don't have fences. I can see up the hill. I know everything. And so I am very connected what's going on. I just want people to know that the mayor is very in tune, but I will not get out there and hammer on people. I work for the council. They set the policy, but I will refrain from saying anything bad about any of our neighbors and any of the citizens of our cities around us, because I believe they have the same rights that we do to do what they feel and to voice their opinion on what they feel is good for them. And so
Mr.
I
Mayor,
think,
if I may,
yes,
I just want to say the thing that bothered me was that they said we opposed it. And I appreciate the working relationship with Kenmore, as my other colleagues have said. I would like them to understand what the impacts and the mitigation we're dealing with are, so they could support our concepts of getting a better design that works for everybody, because they don't actually have residential properties impacted. So
the other thing is,
hopefully you can share some of that the other way.
But we also need to have one message coming, and we had gotten, there are different groups out there that say, some said some different stuff. And when you get groups that are against it, they're gonna grab onto the thing that's the most dramatic. So somewhere during all this, somebody said they wanted to stop the program. And that's where, you know, they're gonna latch onto that. We will talk to them. They know we're not gonna stop it. We know, I will talk to them. I'm a little amazed because Mayor Baker knows this city just about better, Councilmember Baker now. He knows it better than anybody. I've worked with him. We will work on this, but I just need everybody to know that this doesn't go and go to bed. We lay in bed at night, and Phil has got hours and hours in it, and Kim and Steve. It's just, it's hard because we really have a city with 13,400 people, and they all have lives too, and they all have other things going on. And we all have a lot to do, but we are doing what we can. I understand, and we will take care of it as much as we can. So just rest assured, and you got all us, and we guys will go out, and I hope we get out and do walks, go out and see what they're doing. So you know what trees we have asked, and we are trying very hard to get a tree count, exact what trees. We know.
Yeah, it's amazing that we can't actually get one right now.
And you and Julian both came up with a good idea, and we've already talked to Phil about coming up with a way to get all the information we have, just like the website, like we used to have for Sound Center. So we will work on that. So thank you guys for everything you do. Thank you for all the things you passed tonight. That was awesome. Thanks for the understanding on the roundabout. I'd like to see that work out for the citizens. It's, you know, the idea of looking what the real cost is going to be a great idea. We will continue to work on Sound Transit. Tom, I hope your wife gets better. I don't know what to say to you guys anymore. So you guys, thank you very much. Philippa, take care of yourself. Semra, wherever you're at, stay safe. And you guys have
Mr. Mayor, could I thank our police department, not just the SWAT events, but when you look at the city administrator's report, the number of mental health crises that we are dealing with, people who, you know, maybe are doing inappropriate things and trespass, but they're fundamentally mental health issues. So we can't have the RACER program kind of expanded too soon. When I read that list, the number of mental health incidents, I believe that the majority of them had mental health elements to them. So I just want to call out our police department for handling those with great professionalism, and the fact that we need all the help we can get in that mental health arena. It's noticeable that it's dramatically more. Maybe it's a result of COVID, but it's dramatically increased, I think, over even just a couple of years ago.
You know, I'm just on point. I had a $3,500 worth of windows smashed out of my gas station on Saturday night. And the guy stole a payday bar and a Nutter Butter. And that's all he took. And he got arrested because he did it at 8 o'clock at night and people saw him smashing the windows. But and he had lots of issues. But that's what you see. And it's a shame because it's hard on small businesses like mine, because insurance really doesn't pay that. But that's kind of what you're up against. And thank you, Chief. And on that, all the ones that we know about, there's all the ones we don't know about. And so you know, keep an eye on your neighbor's house, keep an eye on everything. You guys want to go home? I'd like to stop for an hour, but Phil, you're up. You have anything?
Keep it to 20 minutes, please.
Yeah, I'll just make it quick. So speaking to RACER, so the board has been formed for RACER. We have the executive director position out. We will be interviewing for that in the next month of February. We had 19 candidates, 8 that made the short list. And so we'll be working on that. Myself, as well as the chief and others will be part of that interview process. Next up will be to get the operations board up and running, which are the boots on the ground of it. And then the principals assembly, to which you appointed Councilmember Goldman. So that is all coming up. No update on the crisis center as of yet, but you know, stay tuned, keep your fingers crossed. We're still working on that. Just point out last Thursday, the cities received awards from NISA. I guess Matt's gonna give us some extra there. The 5 cities received awards from NUSA for the RACER program, the implementation of that, and the fact that I think we accomplished that in about 9 months, making that. But to Councilmember Bodie's point,
you know, one of the things that I said last Thursday night was, as we were talking to our police department, as we were talking to Brooke, who, you know, oversees the radar program, during COVID, there was just an exponential increase in mental and substance issues within the general public that just made us all sit up and take notice and say, what can we do better? And that's what this is a result of. So we're moving forward, and I think that's all I've got for you. Thanks, you guys. You deserve that award. You guys are doing a great job, and
You're back.
you know, that's the way it runs. If us elected stay out of the way, they'd get a lot done. So that's what I like to say. So you guys, everybody have a great night. Staff, you get to go home. We'll end this now, and thank you. Have a good evening. You know, I'm gonna have to be that guy.
Yeah, I have a similar observation.